Hello, everybody. Welcome to Brandon's Haunted Library. My name is Brandon, your undead librarian, and I read and talk about fantasy, literary fiction, and of course, horror. Thank you for choosing my video. Hope you stick around because today I'll be talking about everything I read this October. This was another great reading month for me. I read a bunch of books for the horror category of the Goodreads Choice Awards and made a separate video about these, which I've linked below. Because of this, I'm only going to lightly talk about my thoughts on these books in this video. So be sure to check out my Goodreads Choice Awards video if you want to hear more of my thoughts on these books. So total, I read 8 books this month. 5 of them were horror, and then I also read some magical realism, romance, and science fiction. I'll talk about each in order of my favorites for the month, starting off with my least favorite, Before the Coffee Gets Cold by Toshikazu Kawaguchi. This was a cute book with a pretty fun concept. It was about a small cafe in Tokyo with the magical ability to allow guests to travel through time. It follows some pretty simple and easy to understand time travel rules, and customers must return to the present before their coffee gets cold. The book is split into 4 parts, with each section following a character using the coffee shop's time travel. And while I enjoyed the premise, I think the writing style was a little underwhelming to me. This is Toshikazu's first novel. He was formerly a playwright, and this story was originally a play. And this shows to me, as the story is easy to imagine as a low-budget stage show. Setting is limited to one location, and the story is such a quiet, character-focused story. The text and dialogue are quite simple, but there is a lot of character subtext that I imagine a good actor would have a lot to work with. I imagine this is a better play than it is a novel. This feels like reading the text of a play, which is not something I particularly enjoy. It was overly simple, somewhat redundant, and tedious at points. If you grew up in America or elsewhere in the Western world, you have likely had to study a Shakespeare play or two. It is a similar idea in that reading it silently isn't its intended format. They're plays, and you're meant to watch them be performed. But I think the difference with Shakespeare is that the dialogue was so expressive and ornate, there isn't much subtext that's left to the actor's responsibility to capture, because everything's captured on the page. For me, the novelization of Before the Coffee Gets Cold doesn't really do this, and for me, there's just something that is missing in the writing. The concept and the plot is quite good despite its simplicity, and I'd guess is an incredible play in the hands of the right actors and given good direction. This definitely wasn't a bad book. I just wanted more from the writing. I understand that this is not uncommon for Japanese writing and translation. If you look at Haruki Murakami or Mayuko Kawakami, you'll find a similar simplicity in their prose, but there's just something I can't quite put my finger on as to what makes their prose incredibly impressive to me, whereas Toshikazu Kawaguchi's prose fell flat for me. It's a very quaint novel and had a few emotional moments that were quite effective at tugging your heartstrings. It was simple yet moving. And for that, I gave Before the Coffee Gets Cold 3 stars. Next up, So Thirsty is one of the books I read for the Goodreads Choice Awards, so be sure to check out that video. Rachel Harrison has made a name for herself in recent years as a standout horror author, and her latest book, So Thirsty, continues her trend of delivering character-driven, women-centered horror. While it hasn't been as well received as some of her previous works, such as Such Sharp Teeth, which I really enjoyed, and Cackle, which I want to read, it's still a solid entry into her catalog. The story follows 2 women in their mid-30s who turn into vampires during a weekend birthday trip. The transformation forces them to confront truths about themselves, their friendship, and the lives they've led up to this pivotal moment. The first third of the book hooked me, especially the early vampire encounters and the haunting vampire orgy scene which they were bitten in. However, the book falters midway, the plot gets a bit messy, and is lost in some of the initial charm that had me invested. That said, Harrison's knack for creating flawed, realistic characters still shine through. Most protagonists feel authentic and relatable, even if they're not always likable. Also, So Thirsty leans into its horror elements more than Such Sharp Teeth, but I did find Such Sharp Teeth to have a bit stronger character work and messaging. Still, Harrison's writing style is captivating, and I'm definitely looking forward to her future projects. Overall, I'd give this one 3 stars. The Ministry of Time by Kellyanne Bradley. This is a genre-bending book that combines science fiction with some romance, historical fiction, and some spy thriller elements. This book won the Goodreads Choice Award for science fiction. I'm usually someone that loves books that push the bounds of genre and combine different genres together. It creates a more niche experience for readers, often making them more divisive, but the experimentation often delivers something innovative and original. But for me, the genre bending in this was kind of what held this book back for my experience. And with a book that for me started out so strong and was written so beautifully, it makes the genre flipping in the tail half of the book so jarring. This book is set in the future and is about the British government program that travels through time and remove a group of people through their various points of history and attempts to slowly introduce them into modern society. This story is told from the point of view of one of the government employees tasked to take care of these expats and ensure he's able to adjust to modern society after he's rescued from time travel from a failed 19th century Arctic expedition. This is an actual historical expedition of two ships, the HMS Erebus and the HMS Terror, that became icebound in the Northwest Passage in the Canadian Arctic. And this expedition is also famously fictionalized in Dan Simmons' horror novel, The Terror. The naval officer that was saved was one of the actual officers that died in this failed expedition, which made the ensuing fish out of water hijinks and the eventual forced proximity romance feel a bit strange to me. The book was certainly humorous, and I enjoyed the fish out of water 19th century perspective on modern society. The romance that I think is supposed to be the centerpiece of this novel is convincing and very cute, though it does have a bit of a problematic power dynamic if you think about it. But if you don't, it's a beautifully written romance. And I thought it did use an interesting sci-fi concept to begin to make commentary on issues surrounding refugees and take on themes of colonialism. But to me, the book did not explore this quite as much as I would have liked, but this definitely added some good depth to this book. The climax of the book took an unexpected and somewhat jarring left turn, which was almost an exciting change of pace, but I don't quite think it stuck the landing. But despite all this, and being a little underwhelmed, I did still find myself enjoying this book. It's a promising debut novel, and for that, I gave The Ministry of Time 3.5 stars. The next 3 books I talk about will be books that, again, I covered in the Goodreads Choice Awards video, so I'll be a little more brief in this one. First up, We Used to Live Here by Marcus Cleaver. This is a cosmic horror story that's both terrifying and completely mind-bending. I raced through it, but it left me with more questions than answers. The story follows Eve, who's flipping a house with her girlfriend. A family knocks on the door, claiming the father grew up there. She reluctantly lets them in, but a snowstorm traps them, and soon reality unravels as eerie, inexplicable events take over. What makes this book unique is its mixed media, like accounts of found footage, Reddit threads, and articles about phenomena such as the Mandela effect and sleep paralysis demons. These elements made the horror feel more real and grounded. The book's ambiguity was both a strength and a frustration for me. It left so many threads hanging that I had to do a dive on Reddit theories afterward, and I'm still not quite sure what to believe. The ambiguous ending frustrated me a little, but it also felt intentional, like maybe we're meant to share Eve's descent into madness. Mysteries piled on throughout without many answers by the end, but the unsettling vibes more than made up for it. If you're a horror fan, definitely check this one out. Just don't expect all the pieces to fit together in the end. I gave this one 3.5 stars. I really enjoyed it. Next up is Indian Burial Ground by Nick Medina. This is a dual perspective, dual timeline story about a fictional Native American tribe, the Dakota, living on a reservation in Louisiana. The modern timeline follows Noemi, whose boyfriend's sudden death, believed to be a suicide, leads her and her uncle, Louis, to suspect something supernatural. The second timeline, set back in the 1980s, focuses on a young Louis and is, in my opinion, the strongest part of the book. This timeline explores eerie events on the reservation, from the dead speaking to legends of the Dakota vampire, blending fictional horrors with chilling real-life issues like addiction and suicide. This book very eloquently reflects on the devastating realities affecting Native American communities, like the disproportionate rates of addictions and suicide. His portrayal of alcoholism is especially powerful, showing ripple effects on families and communities. Medina's writing is incredible, weaving folklore into character development and plot in a way that feels both meaningful and haunting. While the story is a bit of a slow burn, the horror elements still hit hard. It's thematically rich, emotionally impactful, and deeply unsettling. If you're looking for a horror that's creepy and emotionally poignant, this is a must-read. I gave this 4 stars. Bury Your Gaze by Chuck Tingle isn't your typical horror novel. It's not particularly scary, but it has tense, bloody moments and a whole lot of smart satirical commentary. What makes this book stand out is how it uses the horror genre to tackle social issues with precision and heart, especially the trope of queer tragedy in TV and film. The story follows Misha, a closeted Oscar-nominated horror writer who takes pride in creating stories centered on gay characters. When his studio pressures him to kill off his sapphic protagonists rather than give them a happy ending because the algorithm claims audience prefer queer tragedy, Misha refuses. Soon after this, he starts encountering villains from his own stories in real life, forcing him to confront both external threats and his own internalized struggles. Chuck Tingle masterfully blends satire, horror, and science fiction while critiquing homophobia, the entertainment industry, and our reliance on technology. Misha is a deeply compelling character, and though the supporting cast could have been more fleshed out, his depth and backstory carries the novel. This book is a wild ride, thought-provoking, entertaining, and packed with LGBTQ+ representation, crafted lovingly from a queer author. If you're into unique, socially conscious horror with a satirical edge, I highly recommend it. Love is real, and so is this book's impact. I gave this book 4 stars. Next up, we have a book called You Are Here by David Nichols. I'm not one to typically love a romance book as much as I did with this one, but there was something special about it. I'm a lover of hiking in the great outdoors, particularly that of the English countryside, and this was a quaintly told story of 2 strangers that meet on a long through hike. Both are in middle age and have been separated from their spouses for some time, and both are varying degrees of over or not over their ex. Both are introverts and are so accustomed to and comfortable with solitude, the type of people that revel at social plans getting canceled last minute. This book alternates between their perspective and each has a unique and distinguishable voice. They felt like real people that were so easy to empathize with. This book reminded me a lot of one of my favorite movies, which is Before Sunrise, because David Nichols has written these characters and their dialogue so well. It is a bit of a slice of life novel where we get the pleasure to witness the wide range of conversations they have along the trail, as they gradually develop romantic feelings for each other. But in my opinion, the romance was not the center of this book. Instead, it is a journey that allows both characters to learn something about themselves and what they ultimately want from the rest of their lives. The novel was written with subtle British humor and was a real joy to read throughout their hike together. Descriptions of the English countryside were enchanting and really transported me as a reader. It was so easy to get lost in this book. It's the type of a book that I'm sure will be great on rereads as it takes on themes of aging, and is a book that encourages and inspires self-reflection. I found myself reflecting upon the life I've lived and the people I've loved and felt inspired by this book. And though some things were left unresolved by the end, this was still such an uplifting book. I'll close this review with a quote. "Sometimes," she thought, "it's easier to remain lonely than present the lonely person to the world." But she knew that this too was a trap, that unless she did something, the state might become permanent, like a stain soaking into wood. It was no good, she would have to go outside. This was a 4.5-star book for me. I absolutely loved it. And finally, my favorite of the month, and easily one of my favorite horror reads of the year, is I Was a Teenage Slasher by Stephen Graham Jones. If you're familiar with Stephen Graham Jones's recent work, you'll know he loves the slasher genre. He's been on a roll with slasher novels since My Heart is a Chainsaw kicked off the Indian Lake trilogy, followed by Don't Fear the Reaper and The Angel of Indian Lake. And if you know me, you know I love a good slasher story. Written as a memoir, it follows Tully Driver, who confesses to murdering several classmates in the summer of 1989. But the twist is that Tully is an incredibly likable character. He is a kid you genuinely root for because of how rough his life has been. And Stephen Graham Jones masterfully makes you empathize with both Tully and his victims, even the ones who are bullies. You don't cheer for their demise, they're just kids making dumb, relatable choices. The writing is raw, stream of consciousness, and deeply personal, which might not be for everyone, but I loved it. Stephen Graham Jones mentions in the acknowledgments how much of himself he poured into Tully's character, and it shows. The story feels like a heartfelt reflection of his high school years in West Texas. The horror and gore are really intense. I winced within the first 50 pages or so, but it's balanced with humor and a surprising amount of heart. Stephen Graham Jones's passion for the slasher genre is so clear. This book continues on themes from My Heart is a Chainsaw, like the relationship between the slasher killer and the final girl, but to me it felt even more personal and innovative in this one. My only critique is a twist towards the end that I found to be a bit predictable, but honestly, It didn't take away from the experience. The book is a perfect mix of horror, introspection, and homage to the genre. This was a wild, fun read, and it's left me even more excited to finish the Indian Lake trilogy. I gave I Was a Teenage Slasher 4.5 stars. And those are all the books I read in November. Thank you so much for hanging out with me in my haunted library. Remember, if you want to hear me talk more about any of the horror books in this video, be sure to check out my Goodreads Choice Awards video. And if you enjoyed the video you just watched, you're not going to want to miss my year-end list, which I'm writing now. So give me a follow so you don't miss it. But until next time, feel free to drop a comment below and let me know what books you've been loving lately. And as always, stay spooky, and I'll see you in the next video.